The morning I drove my daughter to the airport, the sky over Kingston was the color of old dishwater, flat, gray, the kind of February sky that makes you wonder why anyone stays in Ontario past the age of 60. I didn't wonder that anymore. I knew exactly why I'd stayed. 34 years in the same house on Lakeshore Drive. A woodworking shop in the garage. A garden my wife had planted and I'd been tending ever since she passed. My roots were here, deep and stubborn as the old maple in the backyard. My daughter was heading back to Vancouver. She'd come for my birthday, 63, not that it felt like anything worth celebrating. We'd had a good week, quiet dinners, a walk along the waterfront, an afternoon where she sat in the shop and watched me sand cabinet doors while we talked about nothing in particular. Those are the conversations I miss most now. The ones that don't mean anything at the time. I pulled up to Departures and she hugged me the way she always does, both arms, face pressed into my shoulder, longer than necessary. "Call me when you're home, Dad." "I always do." She grabbed her bag and disappeared through the sliding doors. I sat there for a moment watching the space where she'd been standing, the way you do, and then I pulled back into traffic. I was 20 minutes from home when my neighbor texted me. His name is Bert. He's 71. A retired electrician, been living 2 doors down since before my kids were born. We share a fence and a tradition of Tuesday morning coffee. He's not a man who texts for no reason. He types with 2 fingers and considers every word like it costs him something. The message said, "Don't come home yet, something's wrong, call me." I pulled into the Tim Hortons on Princess Street and called him. He picked up before the second ring. "Walter?" I said. I always call him by his last name, Bert Kowalski. But never mind that "what's going on." His voice was careful, quiet in a way that made my stomach drop. "Howard," he said, "I was letting myself into your garage to return your router. You gave me a key last fall, remember? And there were 2 men in your driveway. Didn't know who I was. They were doing something under your truck. One of them saw me and they left fast. Real fast." I didn't say anything for a moment. "Did you get a look at them?" "Didn't recognize them. One had a red jacket. I've got your router in my hands right now." "Howard, what's going on with you?" I told him I didn't know. I told him to go home. I sat in the Tim Hortons parking lot and tried to think straight. My truck was in the driveway. I'd driven my daughter to the airport in my old Civic. The truck needed a brake job I kept putting off. So whoever those men were, they'd come while I was gone and done something to a vehicle sitting in my own driveway on a Tuesday morning in February. I didn't go home. I don't know why, exactly. Some animal instinct, something underneath reason. Instead, I drove to a Home Hardware on the edge of town and sat in their parking lot and thought about the past several months. My name is Howard Calloway. I'm 63 years old. I worked 31 years as a contracts manager for a mid-sized construction firm here in Kingston, and I retired 2 years ago. My wife Elaine passed 4 years back. Ovarian cancer, 11 months from diagnosis to the end. My daughter lives in Vancouver. My son-in-law works in shipping logistics. I have a granddaughter named Rosie who just turned 4 and has Elaine's eyes. I'm a quiet man. I don't have enemies. Or so I thought. 3 months earlier, I'd had a disagreement with a man I'll call my former business partner. We'd been planning to open a small custom millwork shop together. Just retirement work, nothing ambitious. His name doesn't matter right now, but the disagreement was about money. Startup costs, whose name went on the lease, liability. It got ugly faster than I expected. There were emails, there were lawyers briefly. We parted ways and I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. I pulled up my phone and opened the security camera app. I'd installed 2 cameras last spring, one above the garage, one over the front porch, after someone had gone through my truck the previous autumn. Minor thing. Nothing taken. But it made me uneasy enough to put up cameras. I found the footage from that morning. My hands were shaking a little as I scrolled. There they were. 2 men. One in a red jacket, exactly as Bert had said. They came up the driveway at 9:14 in the morning. 12 minutes after I would have left for the airport. They knew my schedule. One of them crouched beside the rear wheel well of my truck, and he was there for nearly a minute and a half. The other one watched the street. I watched it 3 times. Then I called my daughter. She answered on the second ring, probably still at her gate. Dad, everything okay? Fine, yes. Quick question. Do you remember the name of that lawyer you used when you and your husband bought the house? The one in Kingston? She gave me the name. I could hear the confusion in her voice. Dad, what's? Everything's fine, sweetheart. Safe flight. I'll call you tonight. I didn't call the police. That might sound strange, but I'd been around the construction business long enough to know that if someone is setting you up, arriving at a scene with police before you understand what you're walking into can go very wrong, very fast. I needed to know what was under my truck before anyone else did. I drove back toward my neighborhood and parked on a side street 3 blocks away. I walked to Bert's house through the back lane, the way I used to cut through in the summer when we'd have a beer on his back porch. He let me in without a word and put the kettle on. The camera got them, I told him. He sat down across from me at his kitchen table. His house smells like machine oil and bread, always has. What did they put under there? I don't know yet. I need to look. You need to call the police, Howard. I need to know what it is first. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he opened a kitchen drawer and set a pair of latex gloves on the table in front of me, the kind he uses for automotive work. Don't touch anything with your bare hands, he said, and take a picture of it before you move it. I've known Bert Kowalski for 28 years. He's the kind of man who doesn't say much but says exactly the right thing. I pulled on the gloves and went out through the back, over our shared fence, and came up on my own truck from the driver's side, staying close to the hedge. The street was empty. I crouched down beside the rear wheel well. It was taped up in black plastic, small package, about the size of a thick paperback novel. I took 6 photographs from different angles. Then I peeled the tape away carefully and opened a corner of the wrapping. I recognized it even though I'd never held it before. I'd seen it on enough job sites to know what a bag of white powder wrapped in plastic looks like when someone wants it found. My heart was very steady, which surprised me. I felt like I was standing slightly outside myself, watching an older man crouch beside a truck in a quiet neighborhood in Kingston, Ontario, holding something that could end his life as he knew it. I rewrapped it exactly as I'd found it. I took 4 more photographs. Then I reattached the tape as precisely as I could manage and walked back to Bert's house. It's drugs, I told him. He didn't say anything. He poured the tea. Someone's gonna call it in, I said. Or they're going to arrange for it to be found. That's how these things work. You don't put something like that under a man's truck just for fun. Bert wrapped both hands around his mug. Do you know who? I thought about my former business partner. I thought about the emails. I thought about a conversation I'd had with a mutual acquaintance 2 weeks earlier, a retired contractor named Les who'd mentioned, almost as an aside, that my former partner had been complaining about me to anyone who'd listen, that I'd cheated him, that I'd stolen his ideas for the shop. All of it false, but Les had said it with the careful tone of a man who wanted me to know without wanting to get involved. I have a strong suspicion, I said. Then you have to be smart about this. I've heard that phrase before, and it usually means nothing. Coming from Bert, it meant something specific. Slow down. Don't react. Think 3 moves ahead. I went home that afternoon. I had to. Anything else would look strange, but I didn't touch the truck. I moved through my own house like a man walking through a museum, noticing everything, touching nothing. I checked the dead bolts. I pulled the blinds. I sat in the kitchen and opened my laptop and started reading. Over the next 4 days, I lived very quietly and very carefully. I reached out to the lawyer my daughter had recommended. I drove to his office in the Civic, parked 2 streets away, and walked. His name is Stephen, and he's perhaps 40. The kind of lawyer who takes notes in a moleskin with a real pen. I showed him the photographs. He looked at them for a long time without speaking. This is a serious situation, he said, which wasn't news. I know. The photographs are good. The security footage is better. Do you have it backed up off-site? I did. I'd uploaded everything to my Clav account that first evening, and I'd also emailed compressed files to a personal account only I knew about, an old Hotmail address I'd made in 2003 that I'd never connected to my real name. Stephen said, "I want you to go home. Keep your routine as normal as possible, and let me make some calls. Don't touch the package. Don't tell anyone else about it. And if police come to your door, call me immediately before you say a word." That was a Thursday. On Saturday evening, I found out how deep it went. I had a habit, I suppose, of keeping an organized filing system on my laptop. Contracts, correspondence, financial records going back 15 years. I'm old-fashioned that way. It's all password protected, but I'm not a technology expert, and apparently I never needed to be until now. I noticed that someone had accessed my home Wi-Fi network, the router logs, and this is only something I found because I'd watched a YouTube video 3 years prior about home network security that had scared me enough to bookmark the page. Showed a device I didn't recognize had connected 4 days before all of this started, a single session 47 minutes at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night. 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'd been asleep. The garage had been unlocked. I'm lazy about the garage. Elaine used to nag me about it. Someone had sat in or near my house, connected to my Wi-Fi, and spent 47 minutes going through whatever they could reach. I went back through my emails for that period. Nothing looked obviously wrong, but there was one sent message I didn't remember sending. A reply to a contractor I'd worked with. A perfectly ordinary message about lumber pricing. From that same 2 a.m. window. As if someone had used my email account to look ordinary, to test whether they had access to see what was there. I printed the router log. I brought it to Stephen on Monday morning. He sat with it for a long time. "Howard," he said, "I want you to hear me clearly. You need to act like nothing has happened for a little while longer. Can you do that?" I told him I'd been doing it for a week already. He nodded. Good man. What Stephen had found, through his contacts, was that a complaint had been quietly filed with the Kingston Police Service 3 weeks prior, before the package appeared under my truck. The complaint alleged that I had defrauded my former business partner of a significant sum during our planning process, $22,000 specifically. The complaint was vague enough to not yet be a formal charge, but it was enough to open a file. So that was the shape of it. Someone had built a paper trail first, a financial accusation, and then added a physical piece of evidence that, when discovered, would make me look not just dishonest, but dangerous. A 63-year-old retired contracts manager with drugs under his truck and a fraud complaint on file. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about my daughter who was 3 time zones away and didn't know any of this. I thought about Rosie, who calls me grandpa and loves when I send her pictures of things I've built in the shop. I thought about what it would mean to have a record, to be that person, to have it follow you. I wasn't afraid, exactly. I was furious in the quietest way I've ever been furious, the kind of anger that doesn't need to raise its voice because it's made a decision. I gave Stephen everything, every email from the partnership period, organized by date, every financial record showing that not only had I not taken a cent from my former partner, I had covered several shared expenses out of my own pocket while we negotiated, expenses he had agreed to and then pretended to forget. I had receipts. I have always had receipts. Elaine used to laugh at me for keeping receipts. Stephen retained a forensic accountant, a woman based in Ottawa who works on financial fraud cases. She drove down on a Wednesday and sat at Stephen's conference table and went through everything I'd brought in 4 hours. At the end of 4 hours, she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "This is straightforward. The money moved in exactly the direction you said it did." Meanwhile, Bert had quietly spoken to 2 neighbors who had security cameras facing the street. One of them had footage of an unfamiliar car idling outside my house for nearly an hour on the night of the Wi-Fi intrusion. A dark blue sedan, Ontario plates. Bert, who has a patience I genuinely admire, had noted the plate number from the footage, written it on a piece of paper in his careful handwriting, and handed it to me without comment. I handed it to Stephen. He handed it to someone he knew. The car was registered to a numbered company. The numbered company, when you pulled the filings, listed my former business partner as a director. There it was. Stephen made a call to the detective assigned to the original fraud complaint and shared our documentation, the router logs, the security footage of the men in my driveway, the neighbor's camera footage, the financial records, the forensic accountant's preliminary findings, and the plate number. He was careful and methodical, and he did it in the right order, which matters more than most people realize. The detective, to his credit, moved quickly. I was not at home when they went to look under my truck. Stephen had advised me to stay at a friend's place. I stayed with Bert, which felt right, and I sat in his living room and watched a hockey game without seeing any of it. My phone rang at 9:30. Stephen's voice was the same as it always was, calm, measured, with that slight formality he never quite drops. "Howard, they've made an arrest." My former business partner was taken in for questioning that evening. A search of his home, authorized on the strength of our documentation and the plate connection, produced correspondence that confirmed the plan in his own words. He had arranged for the drugs to be placed, he had filed the false financial complaint, and he had, foolishly, kept a paper trail of his own. The charges against him were serious: orchestrating the planting of a controlled substance, filing a false police report, unauthorized access to a computer system. The criminal lawyer he retained cost him more than anything our partnership had ever been worth. The fraud complaint against me was withdrawn. I drove home the following morning. My street looked exactly the same as it always does in February. Salted sidewalks, a skiff of snow on the lawns, the Hendersons' Christmas lights still up because they always leave them too long. I sat in the driveway for a minute before I went in. Then I called my daughter. She answered fast. She'd been waiting, I could tell, though she'd been too careful to push. "Dad, what's going on? You've been strange for 2 weeks." "I know," I said. "I have something to tell you. All of it. I just wanted to call you from home." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" "I am," I said. "I really am." I told her everything. I heard her go still, and then I heard her crying, quiet and angry the way she gets when she's scared and doesn't want to be. I told her about Bert and the router logs, and Stephen and the forensic accountant and the plate number. I told her how it had come apart, piece by piece, because I'd had receipts and a good neighbor and enough stubbornness to not go home when my gut said, "Wait." "You should have told me," she said. "I know." "I'm serious, Dad." "I know that too." She flew back to Kingston the following weekend. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen she grew up in, and I made the lamb stew I've been making since she was 12, and she told me I was stubborn and impossible, and that she'd been calling Bert every 2 days to check on me, which I hadn't known. Bert hadn't mentioned it. Of course he hadn't. The case against my former business partner moved through the system the way these things do, slowly and then with finality. He pled guilty to 2 of the 4 charges, and the judge did not find him sympathetic. He had targeted a retired widower. He had used criminal contacts. He had tried to build a structure of false evidence designed to dismantle a man's life piece by piece. The sentence was meaningful. The record was permanent. I got a letter from the Kingston Police Service acknowledging that the fraud complaint against me had been fully investigated and that no evidence supported the allegation. It's a strange thing to frame, a letter like that. But I framed it anyway. It hangs in the woodworking shop between the window and the wall where I keep my chisels. Elaine would have said I was being dramatic. She'd have been smiling when she said it. This past spring, I finished the cabinet project I'd started before all of this. A built-in bookcase for a family in Westbrook. Solid maple, dovetail joints, the kind of work that takes time and patience and doesn't forgive mistakes. I drove it over on a Saturday morning and helped install it. And when I was done, the woman of the house stood in the middle of the room and said quietly that it was exactly what she'd hoped for. I drove home along the lake. The water was that particular shade of blue it gets in May, and the ice had been out for weeks, and the world looked like itself again. Bert was in his driveway when I got back, doing something to his car with a rag. "All done?" he said. "All done." He nodded once, like that settled something, and went back to what he was doing. I went inside, put the kettle on, and stood at the kitchen window looking at the maple in the backyard. It was fully leafed out. It looked the way it always looks in spring, stubborn and enormous and entirely unconcerned with what winter had thrown at it. I know how that feels now. I think about the maple in the backyard a lot these days. It doesn't do anything dramatic. It just stands there, year after year, and weathers what comes. And then in May it's fully leafed out again, like nothing happened. I used to walk past it without thinking. Now I stop and look at it for a moment before I go inside. What happened to me wasn't random. I know that now in a way I didn't before. The man who came after me didn't target me because I was weak. He targeted me because I had something he wanted, and because he believed I wouldn't be paying attention. He thought I was just an old widower in a quiet house who'd let his guard down. And honestly, I had let my guard down. In a lot of ways. The unlocked garage. The router I'd never once checked. The sense that at 63, the dangerous parts of life were mostly behind me. That assumption nearly cost me everything. What saved me wasn't luck. It was a series of small, unglamorous decisions. Keeping receipts for 15 years, watching a YouTube video about network security in 2021 because it made me nervous, installing 2 cameras after someone rifled through my truck the previous autumn. None of those things felt significant when I did them. They were just habits. The habits of a man who paid attention, even when there was nothing in particular to pay attention to. Bert saved me too. Not because he's extraordinary. He'd be the first to tell you he isn't. But because he's decent. He noticed something wrong and he said so. That's the whole of it. Decency is quieter than we make it out to be. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up with a pair of latex gloves and tells you not to touch anything with your bare hands. I used to think of integrity as something you had or didn't have, a fixed quality like eye color. I don't think that anymore. I think it's something you practice, the same way you practice any craft. You make the honest choice when it's inconvenient. You keep the record when you'd rather not bother. You resist the shortcuts. And then one day, when something comes at you sideways, you have something to stand on. The clearest head I had through all of it was the head I'd built over years of ordinary discipline. Not panic, not rage, just the ability to slow down when every instinct said to react, to think 3 moves ahead when someone was counting on me not to. That kind of steadiness doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from having done the hard, quiet work of keeping yourself organized and honest when there was no particular reason to. My daughter asked me, when she flew back, how I'd stayed calm. I didn't have a tidy answer. I told her I just kept putting one foot in front of the other and trusting that the truth was somewhere in the paperwork. She rolled her eyes the way she used to when she was 16. But she was smiling. The record is permanent now. His, not mine. And I'm in the shop most mornings, sanding something, and the maple is in the backyard, and Bert is 2 doors down. That's enough. That's more than enough.